World Trade Center 7 by architects and engineers from around the world, of which there are over now 2,000. And various other pieces of evidence, including, the BBC's foreknowledge of the collapse, and they've never researched. What happened was on the day of 9/11, they broadcast the collapse of World Trade Center 7 20-odd minutes before it occurred. Now, when you put this into context, no steel structure building had ever collapsed due to fire prior to 9/11. And
before or since?
Yeah.
Before or since? Yeah.
Before and since, for that matter. If you want to look at something like the Olympus Hotel in Russia, which was a raging inferno earlier in the year, that didn't collapse at all. Yeah. So for the BBC to report before the building went down, and they've tried to wriggle their way out of it very badly, is an extraordinary thing, because they shouldn't be expecting it to collapse anyway.
And this is the Achilles heel that obviously the architects and engineers can see, because not a lot of people know that this tower even collapsed. And what should be made clear at the outset is this is a building that did not get hit with any plane. So how is it possible that 3 buildings collapse, 2 of them get hit with a plane, and this one has the bit with Larry Silverstein saying we gave the reason to poor. Is that something that should be concentrated on, or just the fact that 3 buildings collapsed and this one was hours later without being hit at all? Surely this is the Achilles heel that we should be targeting on.
Yeah, Richard Page, who's the head of architects and engineers, has said that Building 7 is the smoking gun, and that's when I went to court over this, was pretty much what I concentrated on. I left the Twin Towers aside. Not that their collapse isn't suspicious. It is. It's extremely suspicious. But from a legal point of view, what you have with Building 7 is incontrovertible physics on your side, because what happened with Building 7, Tommy, is that initially the NIST and the National Institute for Standards and Technology, who were tasked with investigating the collapses of all 3 towers, said that Building 7 did not collapse at free fall speed, because the implications of a free fall collapse means that every single supporting element of that building has gone. Now, the only way you can do that, and bearing in mind their final judgment on Building 7 was that it collapsed due to office fires. Now, you don't have to be an architect and engineer to realise that fire does not burn simultaneously around the building. It certainly doesn't burn hot enough to remove all the steel structure anyway. These are just physical laws that we're all well aware of, and then the Cardington test site, if you go back some years, were proved in this country when tests were done on the melting points of steel. So to suggest that a building could fall through the air at 2.25 seconds of free fall, which was pointed out to NIST by a high school physics teacher in America called David Chandler, was so compelling and so incontrovertible that NIST actually revised their opinion on free fall, because it was so easily measured, and included it in their final report of November 2008. Now, all they do is, this is hidden in plain sight, they just hope that nobody reads it. And unfortunately for them, lots of people have read it and know what 2.25 seconds of free fall means. It means that 100 foot of that building, because the building fell through mid-air, fell through fresh air for 2.5 seconds, and that's free fall, is falling through fresh air. There is 0 resistance. The only way that can be achieved, symmetrical fashion, is by planting explosives and removing 100 feet of structure all the way around the building, so it comes down in a perfectly straight line. And this is something that the BBC has gone through hoops to cover up. And I bombarded them with letters to the people who made their programs, Renegade Productions, for example, on Conspiracy Road Trip, Mystery of the Third Tower, things like that, that have blatantly covered up the real cause of the collapse, and it's incontrovertible that building had to have been blown up. And we have eyewitnesses and ear witnesses for the explosions, and the BBC have demonstrably edited those out, and I proved that in court, showed that in court, that that there are explosive sounds heard, There are policemen telling people to come away from the building. It's about to blow up. And the BBC very carefully edited those out of the materials they showed on the third tower being Building 7. So, and I fared pretty well in a courtroom, and obviously you can get charged with frivolous and vexatious litigation. I didn't. I wasn't given a fine. I haven't had a TV licence for over 5 years. I was fined not 1 penny and given a conditional discharge, which means I had no conviction. So I have no conviction for never having a TV licence, not for at least 5 years.
Brilliant.
Based on that evidence.
Mm. And how long did you take in court? How long did they listen to all this? You put everything to them? Were they forced to sit there and watch it all?
No. Well, what happened is you have a pre-trial hearing, which we had in Crawley in December of last year, and I had people. Tony Farrell, who's a former intelligence officer for South Yorkshire Police. I had a man called Ray Savage, who's a former anti-terrorist officer for West Sussex Police, who'd come along to sort of, to lend professional credence to my arguments, and who agree with me. It's very difficult to disagree with Isaac Newton. And the judge said to me, right, okay, I accept that your argument is unusual, but you do have to find a legal argument against strict liability. Now, television licensing is strict liability, much like your income tax. It's set in stone. There is no legal way around it. And my legal argument was, well, I'm obeying one law to prevent me, breaking another one. I couldn't pay them because the Terrorism Act does say if you have reasonable cause to suspect, you don't pay. Now, the legal system just turns around and says, well, strict liability is strict liability. You have to pay. And so it would appear that the Terrorism Act only applies to people and organisations outside of government. And the BBC, let's be honest, is very much part of government. We know they're part of government because their Royal Charter and their editorial guidelines, if you go through those, in the event of an emergency, and I assume 9/11 was even an emergency in England, they come under the control of Whitehall. And boy, does it look like it, because they have really, really gone through extraordinary lengths to cover up everything about Building 7 and make sure the British public don't get to hear about it.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, the fact that we can read into it and find it all, it should be the noose to hang them on, but they've got control of the mass media and everything that they can afford to put out there, because, they can ostracise people like ourselves who question it as paranoid or conspiracy loons, and they don't give it airtime. Any airtime it's given is always on the basis of, listen to this mad conspiracy theorist, and anything that challenges people's view of the status quo, you're undermine. If you present something to someone and it undermines their whole belief and ethos of everything, they reject it just because of it's a defence mechanism. So you go and tell someone who, what happened in 9/11, and they'll say, oh no, it didn't happen like that, even although they'll come up with ideas, to defend and to justify their position, even although it's, and that's the power of the media, that they can brainwash people. If you notice, every incident that happens, the defining viewpoint that people take is made within those first few minutes, first few hours, or first day. So the headlines the next day and everything about the next day is key, because that sits in the memory of the public, and trying to change that message after it it's like shutting the door when the horse is bolted. So it's an immense propaganda machine that everybody watched it for those first few days. And so to change an immense propaganda machine that was able to tell us within 30 minutes, oh, we're 90% sure it's Osama bin Laden. As soon as I heard them saying that, I thought, shit, man, if they're that fucking sure 30 minutes after it, how much sure were they before it? And it turns out the FBI knew about it. There was even FBI agents that were killed over it. There was even mayors, there was even senators being killed. There have been a whole load of people as part of this cover-up, people who were speaking out about it. These architects and engineers, do you think they'll ever get anywhere but would be able to get a proper justice? Do you think there's any chance that proper justice will be served? Because these people who are doing it, the architects and engineers, I think this is their best chance to get it. But somehow, if they can bury the death of Kennedy for 50 years, we're only 12 or 13 years into this one, we'll still, our children and children's children will still be fighting to get the answers. But I mean, do you think that the campaign that the architects and engineers will prove to be fruitful?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I suppose it's how you define fruitful, doesn't it? Is it going to lead to arrests and things like that? I mean, what anybody within the truth movement wants to achieve, obviously, is a new investigation. And when I say a new investigation, that isn't one that's set out by the American government, because if you look at the original investigation into 9/11, it was completely fudged, and even half a dozen of commissioners say so. I think what architects and engineers are doing is probably the best way to go about it. I mean, other than direct legal action, and that has been tried. I mean, they're trying to go for critical mass, I suppose, which does take a long time. But they're doing it in very dramatic ways. I mean, if you were a New Yorker and you saw the posters that were up in Times Square, I think you'd have been shocked. And there are now polls that have been done in the States where, pretty much half the people who look at the collapse of Building 7 are convinced it's a controlled demolition. I can't remember the exact figures, but an awful lot of the other 50% are unsure. Now, that translates, I think, from a poll of just over 1,000 people into 135 million Americans. Had they seen World Trade Center 7 collapse, would say that it was a controlled demolition, because it is. I mean, they're not wrong in thinking that. It is a controlled demolition. There's no two ways about it. You simply cannot have a building go into free fall for 2.25 seconds, and that's in the government's own report, without it being the structure being removed instantaneously. So, will we achieve? Well, first of all, you have to get the media, unless you can change the media, and I'm talking about people like the BBC and ITV. I mean, you're quite right. What you were saying about the first 5 hours following 9/11 was these seeds were sown very quickly. Oh, it's Osama bin Laden. Now that's very strange, because if you actually go to the FBI's website in 2006, Rex Toome, who was a publicity officer for the FBI, said, well, he's not listed as being wanted for 9/11 on our website because we have no hard evidence linking him to it.
Yeah,
so.
Robert Mueller, after 1 year of going through Afghanistan, Robert Mueller, head of the FBI, says they've not found one shred of paper pinning Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, to the Twin Tower attacks, and that's a year going through Afghanistan. Yeah,
absolutely. And if people are getting their news from the mainstream media, unfortunately, they're not going to know. And thank God we actually still have the internet. How long we'll have it for, I don't know. Because they do actually put some stuff out there in plain sight, which any sensible person looking at it will think, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't actually gel with what they're telling us on the television. Of course, we have a huge problem with television companies in this country. I mean, most people won't even think about it, but when you go to the newsstand, WH Smith's, wherever you go, and you look at today's headlines, they will all be pretty much the same, which is rather strange for a so-called free press. And then if you watch the news, Channel 4, BBC One, ITV, every single night the headlines will be the same. It shouldn't necessarily be that way. But there is a very, very small handful of people deciding what news we get. And the answer for all of this is always look at the richest people. Who own what? Who owns the media? Who is running the BBC at the top end as far as their news is concerned? And of course, there's political influence everywhere in our news, and we should be very wary of it. But if we can change the media, I mean, Russia Today in September this year, although you might not consider them mainstream media, I mean, they are available in pretty much every hotel room in the world. It's
my news channel of choice now, Tony. That's all I ever watched.
Yeah.
It's brilliant news.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? We're all watching Russia Today. Said it flat out, that 9/11 was an inside job. Now that will have had to go through many, many lawyers before they could dare broadcast something like that. Now, such an announcement should be on every mainstream channel in the world. Oh my God, the Russians actually said this. But of course, it doesn't get a mention. Neither do the billboards in Times Square. Neither does the court case of someone like April Gallup in America, who attempts to sue Cheney, Bush, Myers for, I think it was neglect, because she was in the Pentagon that day, for not evacuating the building, knowing it was about to be attacked. climbed out through the hole at the Pentagon where the alleged airplane struck,